My name is Dennis. This is Ramit. We are with the AWS open source team. We work for AWS on core Airflow and the Airflow provider package. I'm going to be talking about deadline alerts. I'm going to start by talking about what we're replacing, which was the SLA feature, which was removed in 3.0, and then how it compares to the new deadline alerts feature, which is added in 3.1. After that comparison, Ramit here is going to go into some more detail on under the hood how deadline alerts actually work and what we're planning on for the future. I've given this talk or something very similar 3 times now while the feature was in progress and taken a lot of feedback. It's been a subject that a lot of people have some very strong opinions on and some great feature ideas. Every time I've done this talk or something similar to it, we've walked away with a whole bunch of feature ideas. So the first 2 slides, I'm going to read off the thing because this is straight out of the documentation. So what is an SLA? An SLA in Airflow 2, an SLA allowed users to set a duration for a DAG or a task and get a notification if they ran longer. I should also add the last slide is a QR code. There's going to be a lot of words on the screen. You don't necessarily have to read them all. You can read them at your leisure later. As opposed to deadline alert in Airflow 3, deadline alerts allow you to set the time thresholds for your DAG runs and automatically respond when those thresholds are exceeded. That pretty much sounds like the same thing to most people. So here's all the differences. We're not reading it. In a nutshell, SLA is like a roller coaster. You have one place where you can get on. It will run the duration as long as it runs, and you are stuck with it until it finishes, and then you can realize that was maybe a bad idea. Deadline alerts are more like a subway. You could pick which stop to get on at. You could pick which stop to get off at. If you realize maybe this was a bad idea, you can get off immediately, or within a few minutes. So that's basically what that last slide in a nutshell. Again, a whole lot of words. What it boils down to is deadline alerts are way more flexible and more timely. So with SLA, you defined a maximum amount of time you would like your DAG to run for. So you would just say an SLA of 1 hour. If this DAG runs for 3 hours, at the end of that 3 hours, it'll check and say, that should have finished in an hour. Something went wrong. That's not all that useful. Deadline alerts, the way they work is you pick what we're calling a reference time, an interval, and a callback. So Ramit will go into these in a lot more detail. I'm giving the overview here. The reference time is when you start counting from. Your interval is how long to start counting. And then the callback is what you do. So for example, you can say, if this doesn't finish 30 minutes after it's queued, I need an email. And this gets checked once every scheduler loop, which is by default every 5 seconds. I don't know how many people actually change that, but in this case, if you're using the defaults, you will know if it failed within 5 seconds and not wait until the thing maybe eventually finishes. I mean, if the DAG never finished, then you never got an SLA alert because it checked when it finished. So it's much more timely and much more flexible. You could decide if you want to start counting from when it's queued, when it actually starts. We've got a reference in there for, well, 4 of them. 4 of them are shipped, and there's documentation on how to create your own. Now, I don't want to steal too much of Ramit's thunder, so I'm going to move on. So hopefully you are sold. If you're not, the SLA is gone, so you're kind of out of luck anyway. All right, and I'm going to hand off to Ramit. He's going to go into more detail about everything I've just talked about.
Thanks, Dennis. So how is a deadline alert defined? There's 3 parts to it. There's a reference, which is when to start counting time from. There's the interval, which is how long to wait for, and then set the deadline time. And then there's the callback, which is what to do once the deadline misses. Here's an example of what a DAG might look like with two deadlines. So on the right side you'll see there's code for two deadlines in this tag. There's a deadline for 30 minutes after the diagram was queued. You would get a Slack message, and then 60 minutes after it was queued, you would get the on-call engineer would get an email. Left side just shows describes it in English. But yeah, so you might also notice that there's to define the callbacks there, I'm using async callback, which I'll get more into later. And then for the actual callables, I'm using the Airflow built-in notifiers. So here's how they work. Every new diagram, if there is a deadline attached to a DAG, the expiration date will be calculated and stored in the database table. And then for in the scheduler, in each loop, if there's any deadlines that have a deadline time in the past, but have not been marked as handled yet, then they will be handled by the callback handler, which is responsible for queuing the callbacks to run in the place that they're supposed to run. So there's, as I mentioned, there's two kinds of callbacks. There's a sync callback and there's an async callback. If it's a sync callback, it will run in the executor or worker. And then if it's an async callback, it would run in the triggerer. And once the callbacks are done running, it would update the deadline state in the table. One other thing I want to mention is if the deadline is missed, the row for that deadline will be stored in the database table for archival purposes or observability or any analysis that you want to do later. But if the deadline is not missed, then it will be removed from the database table. Here's the currently four kinds of deadline references you can set for deadlines. There's QDAT, which can be useful for monitoring, deadline QDAT, which can be useful for monitoring resource constraints. There's diagram logical date that can be useful for ensuring that DAGs complete before their next scheduled run. There's the fixed date time, which can be useful for making sure DAGs finish by a specified time. And then the average runtime, which was recently added, for detecting unusual activity in the diagram runtime or environment. And then now let's discuss the differences between async and sync callbacks. So async callbacks are available in Airflow 3.1, and sync callbacks are expected for 3.2. So as I mentioned, async callbacks would be running on the triggerer, and they would be they would not be blocking the thread for any remote API calls, which would likely result in a lower runtime overhead. Sync callbacks would be running on the executor and likely share more resources with the tasks. So I guess one of the ways you could decide if you should use async or sync would be I guess whichever of your triggerer or executor is generally busier. Another downside of the async callback is that it requires restarting the triggerer if you change the definition of a custom callback. This is because the triggerer imports function definitions or anything with user code like on startup, and it doesn't support importing any Python modules afterwards. As for the sync callback, since those will be running in the executor, those have access to DAG bundles, and they can read. They can import it while it's running. Just before it runs, so it would use the same definition that I guess that you would be used to for running tasks. And then, of course, the async callback requires an async callable, and sync callbacks can run any Python callable. As for callback support, um, there's for async callbacks, there's they support existing notifiers that have async support added. Currently, that includes Slack, email, AWS notifiers, includes SES, SNS, and SQS. There's more coming soon. I think there's a PR up for the Jira notifier, so that's going to be coming soon as well. And for custom callbacks, like I mentioned, it must be present on the trigger's syspath. And a good way to do that would be to add it to your plugins folder. As for the sync callbacks, they support all existing notifiers, and custom callbacks can be placed anywhere in the DAG bundle. I will do a demo.
I know I just sat through one of these. I know it's probably impossible to read the screen, and I apologize for that. I tried to make the font as big as I could. Top left corner, you can see the DAG that is being used. Top right is my Slack instance, and the bottom is the Airflow instance that you all should know, hopefully. You can see we are running right now Slack as a on success callback. This is just kind of a control run just to make sure everything is working. You can see in the top right corner that the callback did send a message through using the async callback that Ramit was talking about a moment ago. So that was triggered by the triggerer to send the message on success. Next, we're going to see two other DAGs, one which will trigger and the other one will not trigger their deadline alerts. So you can see here, this one should not trigger. It's an empty operator with a timeout of 20 seconds. So it's just going to run. And we can see on the bottom there, it'll be marked as a success immediately. And no message went through as expected. And just to make sure everything is still working, here's the one that should trigger. It is a 10-second sleep on the task, and the timeout interval is 1 second. So again, within 5 seconds, we should have a failure of the deadline and a message delivered to my Slack. 2, 1, haha. And there it is. And you can see there, Ginger templating is working. That was a bit of a challenge that Ramit actually solved. So thankful for that. So you can use whatever Ginger templating in your messages for email or Slack or whatever. If you want to say which DAG ID failed, it's there, it's built in.
So I guess we can recap with what's available in 3.1 and what's to come. So currently in 3.1 we have DAG level deadlines for DAG when started, queued, or fixed date time, and average runtime of a DAG. You can add multiple deadlines to each DAG, and it supports async callbacks, including built-in notifiers, a subset of built-in notifiers. And currently they're executed by the triggerer. In the future, likely 3.2, we're planning to add support for sync callbacks in an executor that you can pick, or you just use the default executor. You also thinking of adding task level deadlines and maybe some expanded trigger references based on event-driven or dataset related references, and more support for async notifiers